What honour, joy, privilege. I don't take it for granted and never will. The opportunity to open God's word here at Eagle's Nest Church amongst you, my friends, brothers, sisters. And I just never take that for granted. First sermon of the year for me, actually. So let's see how long I go on for. Okay, Luke chapter 4 is where we were at when we started praying at the beginning of the year. And I want to read you a few verses. Some of them we'll know exceptionally well, and others we don't look at quite so often, but they're just as important for what I want to share this morning. So Luke chapter 4, verse 16, speaking of Jesus, he went to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it was written. Very deliberately, he read these bits out. So he's reading from Isaiah in a scroll. They didn't have books in those days, but they had scrolls, and the scribes had written it down. Didn't have verse numbers and stuff, but he found this very specifically. And this is what Jesus said. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. That's what we've been sort of talking about a little bit over the whole of January and into February, and I'm going to be focusing on that as well in a moment. Then he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. As he sat down, this is when he'd start his message. The way it worked in synagogues is the guy giving the message would often sit down and you lot would all be standing up. It's like a bit of a role reversal. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fastened on him. He began by saying to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at his gracious words that came from his lips. "Isn't this Joseph's son?" they asked. Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal thyself.' And you will tell me," it's like Jesus getting a little bit angsty here. You know, they've just said, "Oh, good job with the message." And now he starts, "You'll say to me, 'Physician, heal thyself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet none of them in Israel were cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. And the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of town, took him up to the brow of the hill on which the town was built, in order to throw him off a cliff. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way." I'll come back to that sort of more angsty stuff a little bit later. So Jesus here, he's beginning his ministry. He'd just come out of 40 days of fasting in the wilderness. This is the launch of his public ministry. In the wilderness, he'd got to know Father God more intimately and more closely. And then at the end of the 40 days, the devil had come and tempted him. And even though he defeated the devil on the cross publicly, when he was crucified, here's where he really took the devil down in the wilderness. This is where the devil realized, I've got no hold on this Messiah. So he'd just done all that sort of stuff. And he comes out and he launches his ministry. So this is, if you like, his mission statement. This is what he was about. And he chooses to quote from Isaiah verses 61, verse 1 and part of verse 2. Again, I'll come back to that. And he's saying, "I'm here as God, as the antidote for the human condition. The poor, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners." When he's talking about poor, he's not talking literally about materially poor. He's talking about spiritually poor. So he's saying, this is my mission statement. This is why I've come. This is why heaven has invaded earth through me, through God in my bodily form. This is what I've come to do. This is the purpose of God on earth. I've come to do all this stuff. So he says, the first thing he begins with, his launch pad is, I've come to bring good news to the poor. He's not talking about fat bank accounts here. I've sat with people who have got money flowing out of their ears. They won't necessarily admit that, but their bank balances are absolutely fine. Their prosperity is assured. Life is going to be good for them in a wealth sense. And yet they've sat opposite me on a table and held a glass of beer and talked about a soul that is totally empty. I've had loads of those conversations. Don't really know what life's about. I'm not sure what the purpose of it was. I don't know what my true meaning is. Why on earth am I here? That sense of full bank balance, and yet their soul is empty. I've sat in mud huts, and I've sat with churches with tin roofs, with 25 people that are full of the joy of the Lord. Absolutely packed full. And yes, they need better health care for their moms giving birth, so we can help with that. And yes, their kids need a better education to give them life chances. Yes, we can help with that. But the last thing we want to do is give them our materialistic, worrisome mindset about life. That ain't helping anybody. Their spirits are full. Spiritually, they're rich. The good news of the gospel, thank goodness for me. This greatest news, this word gospel means good news, great news, greatest news, is that if we have Jesus, we are wealthy beyond measure. We are wealthy beyond measure. And if any of us, whoever, whenever we find ourselves in life, this isn't just about becoming a Christian thing, even though it is, but if we come with humility and just acknowledge our spiritual weakness, our failings, our limitations. And again, I don't mean to be rude. I'm just, it's an internal dialogue going on here in mine. If I'm just willing to admit in front of God just how limited I am, John Fahy is a human being. He says, I can do something with that because you know you need me. And if you know you need me, you'll trust me where Dex was leading us. And you'll rely on me. And if you rely on me, then I'll pour blessing and resources and spiritual health and wealth into your life because you get it. It's me you need, not just the fat bank account. Whatever a fat bank account might mean, you see. We don't tend to walk around with crowns these days, do we? As Dex was leading, we don't tend to. I doubt any of us have really got a crown at home. Maybe you have. Maybe you have. Would I be surprised? I'm not sure anything surprises me these days. But you have got the keys to your house or your car keys. You have got that job that is just really important to you. You have got that thing that you've got in the past where you've got some accolades. Are we willing to take those off and just lay them at his feet and say, it's you that I need, Jesus. I acknowledge my spiritual poverty. Jesus says, I've come to bind up the brokenhearted. You see, the words flow from Isaiah, but Jesus isn't just trying to use good words here. I've come to bind up the brokenhearted. As he looked out on the synagogue, I believe he was eyeballing individuals, you see. Like thankfully, I've not got to a delusional state yet where I think I'm Jesus, but that sense of like, as I'm preaching, as a preacher's preaching here, it's important to have some eye contact. But I'm not trying to embarrass yourself or myself by letting the stare linger too long, but Jesus did. He'd often pick people out. There was a bloke with a withered hand once hiding at the back, and Jesus is talking, and he very deliberately gets him and calls him out. Jesus has eyeballed people when he talked. So he's saying, I've come to bind up the brokenhearted. And I'm absolutely convinced he's looking at those that are brokenhearted that morning. Jesus did it all the time. Zacchaeus hiding up a tree, he came and found him very specifically. It's your house I'm coming to. The woman with the issue of bleeding, she stopped, she just touched him in the midst of a crowd. He says, who touched me? He eyeballed the individuals, you get it. It's not just an ethereal general point that Jesus is making. He says, I'm here right now to bind up the brokenhearted. Bankruptcy, loss of a loved one, divorce, job loss, sickness. Jesus overflows with compassion. I really believe this. For the brokenhearted. Jesus invites us, when we know our hearts are broken, to cry out to him for help. When Jed was about 6 years old, forgive me, you've heard the story before, some of you, but some of you haven't. When he was about 6 years old, we're walking through Market Square. Don't know what we're doing in Market Square. And he says to me, he used to like asking a lot of questions and still does. If I broke my finger, could the doctor heal that? Yeah, the doctor can heal a broken finger. And so we're walking on. So if I break my arm, can the doctor heal a broken arm? Yeah, the doctor can heal a broken arm. If I break my leg, can a doctor? Yeah, the doctor can heal your blooming broken leg. You know what I mean? And then he asked me something about his lungs or internal organ or something. So if my lungs are unwell, or he wouldn't use that as a sick, but you know what I mean? If my lungs are broken, can a doctor help with that? Well, it starts to get a bit more complicated. We might have to go to a hospital, but yeah, a doctor can generally help with that sort of stuff. And he says to me like, my brain, if I've got a problem with my brain, can a doctor help with that? And it's like, okay, where's McDonald's or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm bored of the conversation now because it's a complicated answer, you know what I mean? Sort of they can, sort of they can't. We don't know much about the brain. It's a bit complicated. And as we're walking through, and I don't know if God helps me in these moments. I don't know if God's trying to teach me something, probably, or whether God's wanting me to say something to my son that maybe gets into his spirit. I don't know. But then I just realized, and we stopped, and I went down on one knee, and I can't remember another time when I've done that. And I said to him, doctors can help with all that sort of stuff. But if your heart, your soul is broken, and even at 6 they get this, that bit inside you that's you, if that bit is broken, there's thousands of doctors that work and medics that work at the hospitals here in Nottingham. I guess 6,000 or 8,000. I remember this conversation really specifically. I think it's about 20,000 medics actually and staff that work across the NUH hospitals. But none of them can help with that. If your heart is broken, make sure you cry out to God, because he's the one who can mend a broken heart. I believe in counselling. I believe in medication. Doctors are wonderful. But as part of the ingredient when we find ourselves broken, we call out to God, because he can mend our broken hearts. Calling out to him is the vital ingredient. Then he goes on to say, freedom for the captives. We can be in bondage to drugs, unforgiveness, alcohol, pornography, anger, resentment, money, success, popularity. Does the list want to go on? Jesus says, the stuff mastering your life. And I don't want you to live like that. There's a way of living liberated, living free. There's a way with me as the center of your life where you're liberated from being mastered by stuff that will ultimately destroy you, whatever that might be. And he comes to offer us freedom in Christ. I'm not saying booze or a career or ambition or sex are bad. Of course not. Quite the opposite. But God says, don't be mastered by them. That's beneath you. You're created in my image. I'm here as the liberator of humanity. And he's looking at individuals again, I reckon, in the room. I'm here to bring you freedom. I used to visit Kuwait fairly frequently in my other career days, and I used to visit there not long after they'd been liberated as a nation. The first Gulf War, which was early 90s, was to liberate Kuwait because Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And those of you that are a bit older will remember that. Those of you, it's like ancient history. But I used to visit there just not long after the liberation. Now, virtually all of you here will have gone to, when you go through passport control in almost any country, you're going through immigration in any country, the people usually the other side of the screen are as miserable as anything, aren't they? Usually it's like, why are you here? Or just like, I don't know, I've done nothing wrong, but I feel guilty talking to you, that sort of thing. Well, when I used to visit Kuwait after the liberation, the guys were like, oh, give us your passport, couldn't wait for you to be here. We're so glad you're visiting our country. We're so glad that your forces came and liberated us. They were smiling like mad. It was like nowhere else I've ever been, because they were captives And now they were free. And it changed the whole persona of a nation. I had this one taxi driver each time I used to go, even after he told me this, but he used to take me around and he'd go above and beyond, oh, this happened there and that happened there, and this is an important part of our city. So I'm going off to business meetings, but he'd give me a tour every time I'd go. I'd be there for about a day. And then he tells me on like my second visit, oh, this was, we passed this one place. Oh, that's the house I was in when Saddam bombed our house. I was like, oh gosh. This guy was full of joy. I'd known him a bit, full of joy. I said, oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. He said, yeah, I lost my eye. I've got a glass eye. He's my taxi driver. It's like, got a glass eye. He'd been captive, but now he's free. God says, I want to liberate you. I've come to bring freedom for the captives. Acknowledge, understand that we have been mastered. And then he says, recovery of sight for the blind. Jesus wants us to see what really matters in life. So much noise in life. Wants us to know what really matters. Jesus is saying, I take the spiritually bankrupt, the broken-hearted lives, the captives to sin and the spiritually blind, and I want to offer them life to the full. The Helen Keller, you'll have learnt about her at school, and we bring her up here rightly ever so often in sermons. Amazing lady, born in the 19th century, died in the 20th century, lost her sight and hearing at 19 months old. So blind and deaf. She was the first deaf-blind American ever to get a degree, studied at Harvard University. Just think about that for a moment. You're blind and you're deaf, and you have been since you're a baby, and yet you've got such an intellect that you can learn to study at one of the most prestigious universities in the whole world. First person to ever do it. Gosh. She was determined to learn to communicate, so she learned to speak. She was a disability activist, a women's rights activist, a world peace activist. So she learned how to speak, and she spent much of her life giving speeches. She learned to hear people's speech using the Tadoma method, which means using her fingers to feel the lips and the throat of a speaker. That's how she learned to speak. She became proficient at using Braille and also used finger spelling to communicate. I worked a bar once as a young guy when there was a Sense conference, the charity Sense, and there was a blind deaf person, young lady, ordering something from the bar. And I went, oh, how am I going to take this order? How on earth am I going to take this order? And I realized she'd grabbed my hand and was spelling something out on my hand. I had no idea. Thankfully, a friend of hers on the conference came and was able to communicate. I can't remember, she was either blind or deaf, but not both, so I could communicate. It was just astonishing. Helen Keller was this sort of person. Here's what she says. The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. Jesus says, I've come to give you spiritual sight. We're meant to be able to see as followers of him what life's about, what's important, what's unimportant, what matters, what doesn't matter. We should be able to see ourselves how God sees us, not how the world sees us. Lord, come and touch our eyes afresh again so we see you more clearly. We see ourselves more clearly, and we see what is important more clearly. So he's reading these passages. Jesus is saying, this is my mission statement. I don't know about you, but I'm all in for this. God, help me see life more clearly. Bind up my broken heart when I'm broken, Lord. I acknowledge my spiritual weakness, and I need you to fill that and be my God. I don't want to be a person, a man, Lord, who is just captured by this world. And he wraps it up and he says, I'm declaring the year of the Lord's favour. We're praying that over the church this year. And I'm not praying for you, by the way, wealth. I hope you're wealthy, but that's not where I find my prayers for you. I'm praying that we'll be a church of incredible forgiveness, both experiencing it and giving it. I'm praying that the year of the Lord's favour means we'll be a church where there's immense freedom, that we'll be a liberated people, called to live like God wants us to live, that will have spiritual sight and spiritual health. You see, when Jesus said this is the year of the Lord's favour, he's referring back to something in the Old Testament that was very specific. You see, every 7 years, the injunction from the scriptures was his debts should be forgiven, the land would be left to rest, and that sort of stuff. But then every 50 years, once in a generation, only once, there was a horn that blew and Jubilee was announced. And in Jubilee, not only were debts forgiven, I felt when I was preparing this, there's somebody here who needs to give somebody some debt, forgive people their debts to you. Somebody owes you something, and they do owe it you, but it's really holding you back. And you just need to release that debt. Anyway, this Jubilee year, every 50 years, once in a lifetime thing would go on, where not only were all debts forgiven, not only were debt slaves freed, so people that had to sell themselves into slavery could be freed and released. That was actually every 7 years as well. But land was returned. Again, it was a fairly new country. I don't know how it would work here if we did it. But the land that was assigned to people equally at the beginning, people go back to their land and have their land again. This idea of Jubilee was one of an incredible fresh start. A massive reset to society and people's lives. Just imagine if you'd sold yourself into debt slavery because you got into trouble, but you know a day is coming in the future where it's guaranteed that you'd be released, that you'd have your freedom back again. And not only have your freedom back, you go back to the land that was given to your family initially. A fresh reboot on life. This year of Jubilee. A new beginning, a second chance, a mulligan. A do-over, the slate wiped clean, a brand new day, a chance to start again. Jesus is saying, in the midst of my ministry, I want to do all that sort of stuff, but hey guys, it's now, and this is the year of the Lord's favour. It's begun. It's started. If you need a fresh start and a do-over, you've come to the right place because I'm announcing it, I'm proclaiming it. It's really fascinating, just as an aside for a moment. In Isaiah 61 that Jesus was reading from, and let me read it to you again to get it into our spirit. This is what Jesus said, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners and proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. But actually Isaiah goes on in the same verse to say this. And the day of vengeance for our God is what Isaiah says. Jesus left that bit. He did a full stop at the year of the Lord's favour. Do you see the difference? There is a day coming when Jesus comes back again. It's really clear this is. He defeated sin on the cross. He died for your sin and for my sin. And he defeated sin and defeated the devil once and for all. And no longer sin needs to be our master. But a day is coming when Jesus will eradicate all of sin and all its consequences and therefore all of sickness and all of pain and all of suffering. And he's saying, when I come back again, I'm eradicating sin once and for all. He'll come back in that sense of vengeance. And he's saying, you're living in a time of grace now. Between that time we're in now and the time when I'm coming back again, when all this favour is available to you. But I'm not going to allow us to take our sin into that next time. May we be a people that just release everything that would hold us back so we can receive everything that God has for us. I've seen it in when fire alarms have gone off in places, in workplaces and stuff. You'll always see somebody thinking, I just need my laptop, or I just must take that bag with me or whatever. And usually it's a false alarm and you get it. But sometimes when you're on a plane, I can imagine some people thinking, as it's crashing to the ground, I just need this or I just need that. And Jesus is saying, if you want the favour, there's some big stuff you've got to leave behind here. Because I'm coming back as the God of vengeance. So leave it now and come and enter this new life I have for us. Jesus stops at favour. Anyway, back to the angsty bit at the end. He finishes where we've got to about the year of the Lord's favour. Today this has happened. So he's declared himself as Messiah. It'd be a bit odd, wouldn't it? If it's not usual for the preacher to make that declaration as the final bullet point. Well, by the way, folks, I'm the Messiah. You know what I mean? It's rightly people would be a bit worried about that. And so he finishes like, this is fulfilled in your hearing. Hey guys, I'm God and I've arrived with all this favour. They don't quite get it, understandably. And initially saying, oh, didn't he preach well? And isn't that good? They seem quite affirmed. Isn't it Joseph's son? They seem quite affirming of what he said. Who wouldn't be when God has said, my favour is with you? But then he goes on this bit when he starts talking about the widow from Zarephath. Widows were pretty lowly people in biblical times, in ancient times. And then he talks about a leper in Syria. And the people understand what's going on here in a way that we wouldn't. They're beginning to get angsty. You see, the year of the Lord's favour, he was saying there's loads of widows, but the favour of God came to this widow in Zarephath. So she's a lowly person who's even a Gentile. She's not even a Jew. So are you saying, God, that the year of the Lord's favour isn't for us? So they're wondering. And then he says there's a leper that's a Syrian over there. And God's favour was on him in a way he wasn't with a load of people over here in Israel. And the people are thinking, how outrageous is this? We are the ones who deserve the year of the Lord's favour. We're the ones that have been the faithful Jews to the Old Testament teaching. We're the ones in the synagogue this morning doing the bidding of our God. And you're saying that God's favour is for other people. And Jesus is ramming the point home. He's already made it clear this is a year of do-overs, second chances. Who wants it? You can have it. And now he's ramming the point home. The least, the last, the lost, the lowest. This is for anybody and everybody. The most spiritually bankrupt. Those that are totally spiritually blind. Those that are most captivated to sin. Those that are the lowest of the low. Hey, if you want it, if you want God, you can have it. As long as we take God on his terms, not our terms. This outraged them. Because they thought they knew all about God. Let me show you a quick video clip. This is to do with football. Bear with it, it's only a minute. Don't know if you caught it. Football, he's saying for him and the fans, I like watching the fan debate. Football is the most important thing in our lives of the unimportant things in life. Jesus is saying, I'm not having that. I'm not willing to be the most important thing in your life to his listeners, to me, to you. I'm not willing to be the most important thing of unimportant things in your life. If it's God's favour we want, and I encourage you to want God's favour, then we have all of him, and he's the most important of all the important things of life. I believe many of us, or for seasons in our life, maybe all of us, go through times and we miss out on God's best and God's blessing because all he is the most important thing of the unimportant things in our lives. And then he comes along and he reminds us. Peter writes it this way, but in your hearts, set Christ apart. Christ is special, significant, the one, as holy, acknowledging him, giving him first place in your lives as Lord. And as we do that, I believe heaven opens, favour pours down, because we've got to that place of humility where we say, Jesus, we really need you. If the band want to come back, I'll pray. Lord, may we be a people, men and women, that experience and know the unlimited favour of God. Thank you that you were delighted to announce this favour to humanity. And 2,000 years on, you're still pouring out your favour. Those that are spiritually bankrupt, Lord, you're filling us up with your spiritual wealth. Those of us that are broken-hearted, you're still longing to bind up because of your incredible compassion. Those of us, Lord, that don't see clearly, you're wanting our eyes to see you most clearly and everything else that stems from that. Those of us, Lord, that are captives, you're here to bring liberation, even this morning. Spirit of God, we welcome you. We welcome you. We simply acknowledge with immense humility our desperate need of you. And we set you, Christ, apart as Lord in our hearts. Let's continue to worship for a few moments.